with more than 1.5 million passengers passing through TSA checkpoints on Sunday alone. The recovery, though, globally has been much slower, and the International Air Transport Association, or IATA, is now considering rapid tests. They've also introduced a vaccine passport to try and pick up the pace of that recovery. Let's bring in Brian Pearce, who is IATA's chief economist. Brian, it's great to talk to you today. We have seen major airline shares really pick up momentum around optimism of the vaccine rollout, the expectation of things resuming to normal. To what extent have the vaccines led to an actual pickup in air travel when you look at the global picture?
Well, clearly on domestic air travel markets, the vaccines are making a real difference. So we're seeing not just actual travel, but we're seeing bookings for the summer in the US domestic market rise really sharply. And I think it's clear we're going to see a strong recovery in air travel on domestic markets. The problem is international air travel. Travel restrictions are still preventing those markets from recovering. They're really depressed at the moment.
Yeah, depressed is certainly the word to use. I mean, just personally, I'd love to go to some of these spots, but we've heard so many restrictions in place, and obviously the idea of an international passport would seem to alleviate that, of course, especially when you look at maybe Americans wanting to travel. But how difficult is that to really find a standard that fits the bill in kind of the discussions amongst the airlines that would be on board for something like it?
Well, I think that's the challenge, and it's not amongst the airlines, because I think we have coordination amongst the airlines. We're all fighting for a common standard for both testing and vaccination, because I think what we need is for the immigration authorities and the national health authorities to know that it's safe to open borders to international travel again. That if they do that, they are not going to be endangering the success that they're having at home at controlling the virus. Which is why having digital evidence of a negative COVID test or vaccination is going to be so important to get international travel going again.
So let's backtrack just a bit to talk about the travel pass that IATA has introduced. You launched a trial last year, started with Singapore Airlines. You've expanded it to other airlines as well since then. What have you seen in that trial phase in terms of a pickup in activity, and how much confidence you think potentially that could have built into travelers who felt a little more comfortable getting on a plane again?
Well, I mean, it's first of all, it's a proof of concept, and it's successful. It works. It enables the traveller to have evidence of a negative COVID test or vaccination, a certificate from an accredited laboratory, and it matches that with the identity of the passenger. So it's something that immigration authorities can trust. And for the majority of passengers, that is going to be a sort of fantastic facilitator to enable them to travel. Obviously, there's a group of passengers that won't be able to, don't have smartphones. So there still does need to be some ability for immigration authorities to accept a paper-based form. But we've seen some of the queues at airports, even with low levels of passengers, to validate these things. So, having this digital evidence, this travel pass, will really facilitate getting back to whatever the new normal turns out to be.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the trade-off too between testing around passengers who might not have access, or as you said, might not have smartphones, but when you look at maybe the gains to be had around instituting something like this, I mean, how much above kind of the trend line would you expect to see if you do get this through and people now once again have the ability to travel internationally?
Well, I think we're a long way from getting back to the trend line that we had before the crisis. I mean, international air travel at the moment is perhaps 15% at best 20% of what it was before the crisis. So there's a huge way to go. And the problem is not that that consumers don't want to fly. Whenever governments reduce travel restrictions, particularly when they remove the requirement to quarantine, we see a surge of bookings. People do want to fly internationally, so it's not a willingness to fly. The problem is the government's confidence to lower their travel restriction, and I think that things like the IATA travel pass will give them the confidence to do that.
Brian, I know IATA also commissioned a study on the effectiveness of rapid antigen tests. And I wonder, when you look at that, how far you think that could go to try and pick up the pace of the recovery? And how do you look at the cost issues for airlines who are already struggling?
Yeah. I mean, one of the problems, of course, with testing has been that they've been so expensive. The standard PCR test has often been more than $100 a test, which can add 50%. It can double the cost of travel. So for many families, that's a real blocker for travel. A lot of the newer tests, particularly the rapid, particularly the antigen tests, are a lot cheaper. They're a lot quicker. And the evidence that we've found seems to be that they are increasingly effective. And they're certainly as effective as some of the current controls that governments have put in place to try to keep the coronavirus out. So we think governments have got to look at the testing regimes as well as vaccination to restart international travel.